Hey creepypasta fans, it's Teresa, and I'll be your narrator for tonight. Enjoy tonight's sci-fi horror story. Also, if you want to connect and support us, make sure to check out our Discord and Patreon links in the description. And remember, stay cosmic. The Dark Cosmos presents The CIA Hired Me to Infiltrate a Secret Laboratory, written by Danny Rangel Nieto. In one gray and sterile room, in a classified location somewhere in America, I had to sit across from a couple of men in suits, with cameras watching from every corner, a recording device on the table between us, and a one-way glass covering one wall. I knew the drill. I've worked for the CIA for longer than a decade, and I managed to stand out in my job enough to earn certain privileges. I've been on the other side of this table, in this cold and lifeless room. I've been on the other side of the glass, watching as the fate of an international leader, a nation, or an entire world hangs by a thread of a fellow agent's report. But most of all, I've been working out there, one mission after the other, one life or death situation at a time, a million lies, characters, skills, achievements, and tragedies every single day for me. I've traveled every continent, trained my body like an Olympian, and succeeded in missions that required brute force, as well as those that needed just one stealthy conversation with the enemy. I was familiar with almost every kind of mission my superiors usually threw at me. What I had never seen before was the kind of folder they passed my way during that meeting. I opened the folder and found just one page. One ridiculous and almost empty white page. This was the least amount of information I'd received for a mission in all my years of experience. The basics were simple. At certain coordinates in the Amazon rainforest, the CIA identified a secret laboratory operating outside of any and all jurisdiction. They pulled all their contacts and used all their resources, and still were unable to obtain any information on what the hell was that place. The best we got was a blurry satellite picture of the establishment, and a higher quality picture of a man wearing a lab coat pulling a box out of an off-road truck arriving at the place. It was taken by a drone that was shot down a few seconds after the image was taken. They managed to pass the drone as something from a random magazine's photographer. But we had reason to believe the security would be maximized after that small incident. But there was a high chance my superiors would decide to intervene at some point if they found out the place was too dangerous or too lucrative. That was my mission, finding out what exactly was going on in that obscure place in the middle of nowhere. Right off the bat, I got a bad feeling about this job. It felt ridiculous to think that the CIA couldn't pull at least some basic information about that place. I was almost certain they were hiding something from me, which wouldn't be unusual, but made me keep my guard up. Was it all just a trick? Were they trying to get rid of me, incriminate me, or test my loyalty? I was wary of everyone around me. The pilots of the planes, the man driving the Jeep, and every fellow agent I encountered on my journey. I second-guessed every meal, double-checked every bag, and locked every door behind me. The shadows in the corners made me jump. I tried to read secret codes and messages everywhere I went. I was growing paranoid, always on edge. And then, suddenly, it was all over. I reached my destination. It was like slamming against a giant brick wall after running for so long. They dropped me off in the middle of the Amazon, with enough resources to survive for 2 weeks, and the promise of more to come soon. I was all alone, with nothing to be scared of, and no one to be suspicious of, or so I thought. I was a professional, and I didn't have time to waste. I worked fast on setting up a sufficiently safe camp for myself, protecting my supplies and equipment, and getting mildly acquainted with my immediate surroundings. Then I was on the move. I had to walk for an hour to get to a place where I could use binoculars to watch the facility I was spying on. Once I made it there, and I got that first look, I couldn't help but gasp. It looked so much bigger in real life, and much more advanced than I had imagined. I was staring straight at some high-end, top-notch technology that I had never, ever seen before. And I guessed it had enough staff, vehicles, and security to cost a fortune. My mind was racing down the list of the CIA's most wanted, trying to determine which government or individual could have a few $1 billion to spare to conduct illicit activities of this size in the middle of the rainforest. But it was useless. If what my superiors said was true, this was currently the most mysterious place on the surface of the earth, and the only way to find out the truth would be from the inside. And I had to be the one to do it. Patience. That was the foundation of my mission. Patience and fearlessness, because I was about to find out just how badly my courage and my sanity would be tested on the course of this job. It was quite a slow build-up, something I had trained for. The lack of information was a source of genuine curiosity at first. I observed the facility and its surroundings for hours on end, coming up with all kinds of crazy theories. Maybe some underground military force was working on experimental weapons. But what if they caught me? Was I going to die in some horrific and creative way? The thought made me shiver. The lack of information was also concerning. But soon, it became utterly unsettling. I started thinking, what if this was a place for unlawful biological experiments? What kind of viruses, sick animals, or mutated soldiers could come out of an extremely well-hidden place like this one? I had nothing that would keep my mind from spiraling down the most dangerous rabbit holes. There was no distraction and no company. There was just time trickling down slowly, like droplets of water dripping down the big leaves of the trees surrounding me. It dragged on and on before falling down all at once, and in the blink of an eye, a week had passed. I could barely believe it. I was so focused on the building I was observing that my surroundings started looking odd. I began to wonder if a certain tree had always been there, if there was a chance my sleeping bag was changed for one of a different color, if something was observing me, or if a voice was whispering to me. One day I was returning to camp, devastated after not seeing a single hint of activity in the laboratory. My head was a mess, I was overthinking every shadow in the forest and doubting if I would succeed at all. Then I got utterly and terribly lost. Those were some of the worst hours of my life. I can't explain the terror of being lost in the middle of nowhere as the sun goes down with all of your supplies away from you. No way to ask for help. Wild animal sounds coming from every direction, and the nearest sign of civilization prepared to shoot you on sight, even if you only got too close accidentally. I thought for sure that would be the end of me, and my mission would be a grand failure. After surviving one night lost in the wilderness, I believe nothing else could take me down. I started getting closer and studying the coming and goings of the off-road cars of the facility so intently that it wasn't unusual that I forgot to breathe and blink regularly. It took only a couple of days before my body inevitably broke down. And then it clicked. I couldn't remember the last time I had any food or water. It was a whole new level of sickness, something I had never experienced before. I had no doubt the psychological effects only made my physical symptoms worse. There was nobody to hold my hand while I shivered and sweat and nearly perished in feverish delusions. There was nobody to hold my hair and rub my back while I threw up the food that I finally remembered existed. The loneliness was suffocating. But it wasn't half as bad as a growing suspicion that someone had found me. Someone had tampered with my water, and my illness was a product of a menacing stranger nearby. If my mind had been working properly, if the isolation and suspense hadn't gotten to me, then I might have taken a moment to calm down and convince myself that the meds were working. I would get better soon, and I would survive. Instead, I stumbled all the way back to the spot where I usually watched my mark. But this time, I went further into the forest, dragging myself over the dirt, the fallen branches, the dead leaves, and the insects. I got closer to it than ever before, close enough to fear that a sniper would hit me at any moment. I lay there, a complete mess, sweating, trembling, and crying without notice, and fearing I was losing my mind. Still, alive or dead, sane or absolutely mad, I could figure that out later. I remember at the time, my only concern was the scenes developing in front of me. I didn't even need the binoculars anymore. First, I heard the fire alarm. Though there was no fire. Was there? Because the emergency came out running through the front doors of the building. I couldn't see the details clearly, but I was at least sure that it was a man in a lab coat limping, but going as fast as he could, as if his life depended on it. He was shot by security guards a second later. Even I jumped at the sound of the guns. There was something wrong, though. Nobody would get close to the body. The front of the facility was filled with people. Everyone was shifting on their feet, pacing the area, scratching their heads in wonder. Their anxiety was contagious. Just like, I guessed, whatever made that man attempt to escape. It took a while, but eventually a group of men in hazmat suits brought out some unfamiliar machines to clean up the mess. I fell asleep before I saw what happened to the dead body. When I woke up, I had to make a great effort not to dismiss that vision as a dream. I knew there was something terribly wrong with that place. I had never been as determined to find out the truth as I did then. I healed from my illness soon enough. I felt re-energized, and I remembered the rules about taking care of myself enough to make sure I could complete my mission. When my first checkup was due, I walked 2 hours to the right coordinates to meet up with a contact, received fresh supplies and a new satellite phone, and I gave direct orders that if I wasn't there right on time for the next checkup, they should immediately assume the mysterious laboratory as a dangerous and top priority enemy, and act accordingly. I was aware of the urgency of my command, but I had so much more than a bad feeling about that place. I had evidence that they were undergoing a state of distress, and I was planning to infiltrate the building as soon as I see an opening. When my health went back to 100% and I went back to dedicating a reasonable amount of time and sanity to spying on the mysterious building, my patience was rewarded with an onslaught of new information. Apparently, the scene I witnessed during my period of near insanity hadn't been a hallucination, and things had changed in the laboratory since then. Almost every day, I was hearing a new alarm ring through the premises, signaling an emergency. I didn't get to see another man die trying to escape that place, but the things I got to watch develop from afar were worrying enough. There was an increased traffic toward the clandestine place. This was very dangerous for me, and never failed to spike up my anxiety. What if the people took a different road? What if they came across my camp? What if, in the blink of an eye, I found myself in a cat-and-mouse situation, with my mission catastrophically blown, and my life on the line? There was nobody near to come help me, to hear me screaming, to be someone I could run to. I was completely alone, exposed and terrified every second of every day. Still, I had to keep going. I had to keep my guard up and not lose sight of the task at hand. Due to its extreme hiding place, only certain capable vehicles managed to get to the laboratory. Usually, a team of workers in overalls and protective gear extracted heavy boxes and containers from the cars. I wondered if they were running out of supplies, ammunition, test subjects, or what else could come hiding in those heavily sealed and protected vessels. One particular exchange caught my attention, raised goosebumps to my skin, and convinced me that horrifying things were going on inside there, and they had to be stopped at all costs. A couple of off-road cars arrived at the gates of the property, but these came empty, save for the drivers. That's when the front doors of the laboratory opened, and the sinister parade started. They were getting out the trash, getting rid of the waste, and I was staring directly at a dozen body bags getting carried out of that laboratory. I couldn't believe it. People were dying in that place by the dozen. This wasn't normal, and this couldn't be legal. But to make matters worse, those weren't regular body bags. Something you'd see in hospitals and funeral homes across the world. Those were specialized, rare, and highly sophisticated types of bags that are used only in cases of extreme dangerous toxicity. Those corpses were contaminated with something exceptionally unsafe for other people, and I urgently needed to find out exactly what it was before they could harm any other people. On a different day, I watched attentively how a group of people arrived walking to the gates of the laboratory. They didn't come in a car, and I guess they must have walked for hours to get to this place. There were 7 of them, plus a person I identified as a guide, an employee of the facility. They all looked exhausted, worn down by the journey. 2 of them were limping, and one of them was basically being carried by 2 others. Still, the employees of the laboratory made them wait by the front gates for actual hours. I watched from afar as each person had to get through a small pile of paperwork. Non-disclosure agreements, if I had to guess. Then the tests started, and I thought it was ridiculous and cruel to put them through that in the wilderness. They stripped the new people of their clothes, took blood samples, examined them from head to toe, and when they were dressed up again, the worst part started. I'm furious about not being able to see what they showed the new ones on some small screen. but whatever it was, it bewildered and disturbed the small group. I couldn't hold back my worry as I watched one of them faint and 2 of them throw up. One of these newcomers attempted to storm off and walked away disgusted and enraged, as if he would have been able to return to civilization on his own, survive the Amazon rainforest and all its merciless splendor, or outrun the guards that started chasing him. When he noticed he was being followed, he started running. But then they shot him. I watched his body fall completely limp to the ground. I was almost certain that he wasn't dead yet, but as I watched the guards carry him inside the laboratory he had been trying to avoid, I didn't know if he would have preferred dying right away. Meanwhile, the people, still conscious, had to sign a brand new stack of paperwork after watching whatever had unfolded in that video they were shown. Afterward, they were finally escorted inside the laboratory. Fresh blood. I wondered if they already had the body bags with each of their names on them. It was that single thought that was enough to convince me to change my strategy. It was time that I entered that goddamn place. I prepared for my next move methodically. I memorized everything I could see about the dynamics of that puzzling laboratory in the middle of nowhere. 2 guards standing at the gates. 2 guards pacing the perimeter of the building, and a change of shift every 6 hours. Every time the front doors opened, I caught a glimpse of another guard inside. Every time a group of workers came out of the building, they were accompanied by 2 guards. But then I took notice of the most important fact. Whenever the alarm went off inside the building, everyone but 1 guard at the main gates rushed inside through the front doors of the building to deal with whatever that emergency was. That was a weak spot in the laboratory's security, and it looked like it would be my only chance. I planned accordingly. I prepared my weapons, my bulletproof vest, and I made sure my phone was working. I was aware that I was risking a lot, and even if I was exceptionally quick, there was a good chance I wouldn't be able to make it out of there alive. A great deal of the success of the operation and my chances of survival depended on the current chaos unfolding inside the place. Something sinister was clearly going on within those walls, and even from afar I could feel the pressure rising, the tensions growing, the clock ticking over their heads as the staff of the laboratory ran around all day trying to solve the predicaments that fell on them every day. One day, I heard the emergency alarm of the laboratory ring twice in less than 24 hours. I decided that was a sign, and the next day I would infiltrate the facility. How was I supposed to know that absolutely nothing would go as planned? Because I didn't have time to lose, I didn't go back to my camp that night. I stayed at my observation point relatively close to the building. I was close enough to wake up with a start shortly before dawn when I heard an explosion. I jumped to my feet and looked around. My ears were ringing, and I could feel the forest shake all around me. The source of the explosion was unmistakable. The laboratory was standing, barely, under a great cloud of smoke, and there was an orange glow coming from the back of the place, where something blew up. I couldn't hesitate. This was the perfect opportunity. I abandoned my hiding place, and with my gun loaded and ready, I ran toward the front gates of the place. I arrived in time to see the last guard enter through the front doors. This emergency was big enough to require all their staff. I shot the lock on the gates and kicked them open. Then I took a careful look around and started walking forward. That's when the front doors were smashed down by a horrible beast coming through. And I was on this monster's path. I was trained for this. Kill or be killed. I started shooting again and again. And that creature wasn't slowing down. I continued shooting. I couldn't give up. My heart started beating like a drum. I was starting to feel that this was the end. And then, the monster fell. I was finally able to take a good look at it, and what I saw... I was standing in front of what looked like a giant beetle. A great hull on its back, big wings like sharp blades, too many eyes to count, and about a dozen legs and hairy antennae that made me shiver with disgust. I didn't want to get too close to it. It was bleeding some clear liquid from its bullet wounds, but when I walked around it, I was horrified at what I found. The beast had been carrying a man, one of the scientists, and this poor guy's body had been stabbed right through the chest by the creature's giant stinger. It was a revolting sight, but I urgently needed answers to two questions. One, where the hell was everyone else? If there was no one running here terrified, then it was safe to assume this wasn't the biggest problem currently attacking the laboratory. And two, what the fuck was this thing? I wanted to believe this was the most extreme and horrifying case of biological experiments imaginable. But I had a bad feeling about this. Then I heard a horrible sound. The man, still stuck between the creature's legs, took one shaky, wet breath, choking on his own blood. I kneeled down in front of him and said, "I'm going to get you out of here. Can you tell me what's going on?" I mean, it was a long shot, but I had to try. He was half gone already, but he did open his mouth. He shuddered and a trail of blood fell from his lips. I strained to listen to his words. I was holding my breath. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Then he said, "Aliens. Fucking aliens." Fuck. Well, that was the last thing I expected. And I almost laughed because what were the chances? But instead, I jumped to my feet and finally entered the laboratory. My head was spinning. I didn't want to believe what I had heard, but hadn't I just killed a monster that looked nothing like anything here on Earth? I wished I had time to make sense of everything, but I had to keep moving. The laboratory was a mess, with scratches on the walls, trails of blood on the floor, and a strange liquid dripping from the ceiling. I identified it as the equivalent of blood running through those monstrous alien bodies. I walked past 2 young scientists hiding under a desk, and I followed a group that was running toward a big door at the end of a hallway. The catastrophe inside that place was devastating enough that no one even paid much mind to the stranger holding a gun. As I approached that final door, I almost gave up being careful. Absolutely nobody was paying any attention to me. I almost didn't even want to see what was on the other side. When I got even closer, I noticed the orange light streaming in. The fire, the rising sun, the combination was mesmerizing. It was a strange background to the actual star of the show. These doors, they led to some kind of courtyard that separated the main building from a smaller one. A place currently on fire, with the roof broken in and about a dozen of those terrible giant alien beetles crawling over it, hovering above or flying at full speed away from us. The scientists were scattered across the courtyard. Some were trying to run away. Others were clearly wounded. And the majority were looking up at the apocalyptic sight above us. I lowered my gun for a moment and pulled out my phone. It was time to call for help. Or at the very least, warn the world of the hell that had been unleashed on us.